Hi, my name is Andronika Randall, and I'm going to present on David Rosenhan and his experiment on being sane in insane places. So, who is David Rosenhan? So, David Rosenhan was a clinical psychologist who conducted a very controversial psychology experiment in the 1970s. And he is influential because he designed an experiment to investigate the validity of psychiatric diagnoses and labels, which is a very controversial topic in the 70s, and some might still say today. David Rosenhan is believed to have been influenced by R.D. Laing, and R.D. Laing is an infamous anti-psychiatrist of the 70s who studied psychosis and didn't believe people were insane, but that the world we live in is insane. Rosenhan attended some of Laing's lectures and thought some of his ideas were pretty good. Laing and other anti-psychiatrists of the 70s believed in mental illness and believed in the symptoms of mental illness, but they didn't believe that all psychiatrists were properly pairing the symptoms to the patient and that lots of patients were being misdiagnosed as well as overprescribed medication. Another person that possibly influenced Rosenhan was Nellie Bly. Nellie Bly was a journalist who in 1887 got herself admitted into a mental hospital without being mentally ill by faking symptoms. She wanted to be put into a madhouse, as they called them during that time, just to see hands-on and report back the mistreatments and ill treatment of people with mental illnesses during the time. And she wrote a very good book. So after attending Lang's talks and just thinking, Rosenhan wanted to answer the question of if psychiatric labels were valid. And him and other psychologists at the time didn't seem to think so. He also touched a little on if the stigma behind mental illness was valid. This wasn't what he was looking to test directly, but his experiment results made it become relevant. And I also think that Rosenhan wanted to see what it was like to be a patient in a mental hospital, which might not come to mind of people who aren't involved in the field of psychology, but as people in the field of psychology, I think that it's always something that comes to mind, and you want to know if people are being treated fairly or if they're not. So Rosenhan and 7 of his friends went to 12 different psychiatric hospitals across 5 different states, all presenting with one symptom, and they were all admitted as patients, which is insane. And they all had no previous histories of mental illness or anything like that, and they all presented with one occurrence of hearing a voice in their head saying hollow, empty thud. And these 3 words are relevant because at the time in the diagnosing books, there wasn't anything associated with those 3 words and like a mental illness. And based off of those 3 words, all 8 of them were considered insane and admitted into the different mental institutions. So after they're admitted, each pseudo patient was honest about everything else. They only lied about their initial symptom of hearing voices and their names just to protect their identity. But everything else they were completely honest about, and none of the pseudo patients took the medications that they were prescribed, and they stayed on average 19 days, which is like crazy. And the results of the experiment showed that there was a lot of depersonalization going on in the mental institutions. So the patients, both pseudo and non-pseudo, were ignored by the staff and made to feel like they weren't people. And that's really bad. And there's also a result of a negative stigma of mental illness. So the accounts of the pseudo patients were contorted, and the regular patients as well, but the accounts of the pseudo patients were contorted to fit into the standard symptoms of their alleged mental illness. So basically, anything that they would do was chalked up to because of their mental illness. So, for example, if someone was just sitting in a chair looking out the window, just writing little notes in their journal, the staff would put in their notes on that person's file that they just would sit in the chair all day and daydream or write aimlessly in their journal with no real like who, what, when, where, or why to it. They would just do it when really they're just taking notes or reading a magazine or something. There was one account of a man, and he was being analyzed by the psychiatrist, and he was talking about his relationships. So when he was a child, he had a really close relationship with his mother and a distant relationship with his father. And as he grew, the roles reversed, and he became really close with his father and not as close with his mother. And his relationship with his wife was good. They argued occasionally, and they never spanked their children. That is what the pseudo patient told the psychiatrist. What the psychiatrist put on the man's file was that he was ambivalent in close relationships, and he had stability issues, and that his relationship with his mother was very tarnished, and that him and his wife would get into angry arguments and disputes and beat the children. It was just a complete, like, not what the man had said at all, but they were just trying to make everything fit into his mental illness. Another result of Rosenhan's experiment was the misdiagnoses. So the pseudo patients were misdiagnosed as insane, and they were only released if they admitted that they were schizophrenic in remission. Not that they weren't insane, but that, yes, I have schizophrenia and I am in remission and I may relapse. So, fast forward to 2004, a psychologist by the name of Lauren Slater wanted to replicate Rosenhan's study to see if the theories still fit in today's climate. So she went she was the only person in her study. She went to 9 different mental hospitals and saw 9 different mental hospital psychiatrists. And she claimed that she heard a voice in her head say the word thud. And she claims in her book, talking about her study, that all 9 psychiatrists labeled her as with psychotic depression and prescribed her antipsychotics and antidepressants. And she quoted this in her book saying, in Rosenhan's day, it was pre-existing psychoanalytical schema that determined what was wrong. In our day, it's the pre-existing pharmacological schema, the pill. So what I take from this quote is that Slater is trying to say that we've moved on from the gross misdiagnoses of people with mental illness, but now it's a matter of people are being diagnosed with mental illness, but they're being given too many medications, or they're not being given the right medications. It's just more of a, okay, you have this, here you go, hope you feel better. Okay, sorry. So some other implications of Rosenhan's study that we can relate to today is that the gross misdiagnosis, yes, it's gone down, but there's been a surprisingly high increase in mental illness in children and adolescents in the United States that some epidemiologists don't agree with. So what the insurance claimers are putting into their data and what the epidemiologists have tried to plot out with their gene trees and stuff isn't matching. And they think that that's leading to an over-medicating, that people are mistakenly diagnosed with an improper mental illness. They'd be taking medication that they don't need, which is something that Slater was somewhat touching on. Another implication is the stigma of mental illness. So once a person is labeled with a mental illness, even if it's incorrect, they're seen differently by others. And this leads to a misperception that their behavior, even though it's based off of their environment, people make it based off of their alleged mental illness. So, for example, if someone's just sitting here and someone like throws water in your face, you're going to react a certain type of way. But if people know that you have a mental illness, they'll say, oh, well, he's bipolar, that's why he did that. When really it's, no, I'm a human being and something happened to me and I'm reacting to it based off the environment that I'm in. There's also another somewhat replication of Rosenhan's study. It was more of a rebuttal to Slater's experiment. And Robert Spitzer and his colleagues questioned 74 emergency room psychiatrists, and they gave them mock patients. So they basically just gave them like list of symptoms and asked them what they thought. And only 3 of the 74 suggested a diagnosis of mental depression, and less than 25 recommended medication. So Spitzer and colleagues used this to somewhat disprove Slater's experiment, showing that no, misdiagnoses has tremendously gone down since Rosenhan's experiment in the 70s, and that, yes, people are still being medicated, but it's not as bad as it was. So, all in all, I think that from Rosenhan's experiment, what we can take away today and put into modern psychology is that mental illness and the stigma surrounding it should be taken seriously and diagnosed accordingly, and that there shouldn't be any bias in how we treat people based off of their